Tonight we descend into the baked clay silence of ancient Sumer, where broken tablets sleep behind museum glass, and where a single, wedge-shaped mark can feel heavier than a stone door. In the early 20th century, archaeologists working in southern Iraq uncovered thousands of cuneiform tablets from cities such as Nippur, Urstya and Uruk. Scholars at the University of Pennsylvania Museum and later researchers at Oxford and Yale helped translate many of these fragments, revealing stories of gods, kings, floods, creation, and a mysterious divine assembly called the Anunnaki. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while the night settles around you, write your location and local time below, so for a moment, this quiet journey feels shared across the dark world. You are standing now in the old land between rivers, where the air tastes of dust, salt, and sun-warmed reeds. The ground beneath your feet is cracked and pale, yet beneath that dryness lies memory. Not memory as we keep it, soft and unreliable, but memory pressed into clay, dried by heat, and buried under centuries of mud-brick collapse. A warm wind moves over the plain. It carries no answer. It only carries grit against your skin, and the faint smell of river water somewhere beyond the fields. In the distance, a temple platform rises from the flat horizon, stepped and severe, its edges softened by time. You do not hear crowds at first. You hear only flies, sandals scraping dust, and the low creak of wooden doors swelling in the heat. This is not a world of marble perfection. It is a world of clay, sweat, grain, and authority. It is a world where the gods are not distant ornaments in the sky, but managers of storms, harvests, kingship, sex, disease, canals, and death. They are woven into everything. They watch the measuring of barley. They listen at the temple gate. They stand behind the ruler, not as decoration, but as the reason he may rule at all. The mainstream record confirms that Sumer was among the earliest literate urban civilizations, with writing appearing in Mesopotamia during the late 4th millennium BC. Scholars from major institutions have shown that the first signs were not grand poems or royal boasts, but practical records. Sheep, grain, oil, labour, deliveries, lists. Humanity's earliest writing, rather unromantically, begins with accounting. There is a small joke in that, if you are still awake enough to appreciate it. Before kings claimed descent from heaven, someone had to count the goats. Before the gods spoke through epics, some tired administrator probably wanted to know why 3 jars of beer were missing. History is often less thunderbolt and more paperwork, yet it is precisely this paperwork that makes the mystery more unsettling. The same civilization that counted barley with careful precision also preserved stories of beings who shaped the fate of humanity. The same scribal culture that tracked rations and labour also copied accounts of divine councils, heavenly decrees, and ancient rulers whose reigns stretched beyond ordinary human possibility. And there, in that uneasy meeting place, the Anunnaki begin to appear. You may have heard the name spoken loudly in modern books, documentaries, online theories, and late-night corners of curiosity. Some present them as ancient astronauts. Some imagine hidden bloodlines moving through royal families. Others see in them the memory of gods, ancestors, priests, or political symbols dressed in sacred language. The truth is quieter, and perhaps more strange because of that. In the Sumerian texts themselves, the Anunnaki are not introduced like characters stepping onto a stage. They appear in fragments, in lists, in hymns, in myths where divine power is already assumed. They belong to a world where heaven and earth are arranged like a hierarchy, where authority flows downward, and where humanity stands near the bottom, useful, fragile, and watched. The scholarly debate remains open over how much these divine figures reflect religion, political structure, inherited memory, or poetic imagination. Researchers trained in Assyriology often warn against forcing modern fantasies onto ancient words. At the same time, they also admit that the tablets preserve ideas far older than many surviving copies, carried across generations by scribes who were themselves interpreting lost traditions. So you do not begin with certainty, you begin with clay. You begin with a tablet small enough to fit in your hand, its surface covered in tiny wedge marks, like bird tracks pressed into drying mud. Perhaps it was copied by a student, perhaps it was stored in a temple archive, perhaps it was broken when invaders came, or when a roof collapsed, or when the city simply became too old to remain itself. However it survived, it waits now with a patience that makes human ambition seem brief. The central mystery is not whether every later claim about the Anunnaki is true. Many are not supported by the surviving evidence, and some leap so far beyond the tablets that they land in another universe entirely. The deeper question is more delicate. Why did ancient Mesopotamians imagine divine authority as something that could descend into kingship, enter bloodlines, and organize human society from above? Why did power need a heavenly ancestry? And why did rulers keep returning to the idea that their right to command was older than the city itself? Your mind drifts toward the temple steps, where the bricks are warm beneath the last light. Priests move quietly in linen garments. Workers carry baskets of mud, reeds, and grain. Somewhere inside the temple storehouse, jars are sealed, tablets are marked, and names are recorded. A king may sit in his palace, but the temple watches him. The god owns the city. The ruler serves the order. That order has a name in many texts, though it is better felt than defined. It is the sense that the universe has an arrangement. Cities have patron gods. Rivers must be controlled. Labour must be assigned. Offerings must be made. Kings must prove legitimacy. Humans must work, suffer, pray, reproduce, and die within a structure older than themselves. The Anunnaki belong inside this structure. They are not merely beings. They are part of a system. In later interpretations, the word bloodline becomes tempting. It gives the mystery a physical body. It suggests secret descent, hidden inheritance, and the possibility that some families carried more than ordinary status. Ancient rulers certainly used sacred ancestry to strengthen their claims. Royal inscriptions from Mesopotamia often link kings to gods, divine favour, miraculous birth, or chosen status. The language does not always mean literal blood as we might mean it, but it does reveal something equally powerful. People obey stories of origin. They kneel before beginnings. A king does not need everyone to understand theology. He needs them to feel that his authority is woven into the nature of things. He needs the farmer, the soldier, the widow, the merchant, and the scribe to believe that rebellion is not only political, but cosmic. To defy the ruler may be to disturb the order of heaven and earth. That is a very useful idea, especially if you enjoy staying king. Still, the tablets do not let the matter rest neatly. Some stories speak of gods shaping humanity for labour. Some describe divine decisions made before humans fully enter the stage. Some preserve lists of rulers from before a great flood, their reigns stretching into impossible spans. These are not ordinary memories. They are mythic architecture, built to connect human society with a time beyond human reach. Long before recorded history, or at least before history as we can firmly measure it, the Sumerian imagination placed authority in a vanished age. In that age, kingship could descend, divine beings could decree, humanity could be made, assigned, and fitted into a cosmic economy. It is possible that these stories encode social realities through sacred language. It is also possible that they preserve older anxieties about dependence, hierarchy, and the mystery of consciousness itself. Perhaps the bloodline is not only about bodies. Perhaps it is about permission. Who is allowed to rule? Who is allowed to interpret the gods? Who stands between heaven and the fields? Who writes the tablet that tells everyone else what has been decided? The quirky fringe tidbit, whispered from the modern edge of the subject, is that some readers connect the Anunnaki to unusual royal ancestry, hidden genetic lines, or visitors from the stars. These ideas are not accepted by mainstream Assyriologists, but they endure because the ancient texts leave shadows where certainty feels impossible. A broken myth is a perfect home for speculation. Missing lines are very hospitable to imagination. You remain there in the dusk, watching the temple fade from ochre to violet. The city grows quieter. Fires begin to glow in courtyards. Somewhere, a child coughs. Somewhere, A woman grinds grain. Somewhere, a scribe bends over wet clay, pressing signs that will outlive his name by 5,000 years. He does not know you are coming. He does not know that one day strangers will stare at his marks and ask whether they reveal a hidden truth about divine blood. He knows only the pressure of the reed stylus, the smell of damp clay, and the rules taught by older hands. Copy carefully. Leave no line unfinished, preserve what was given, and so the night gathers over Sumer, not with thunder, but with stillness. The mystery does not open like a door. It loosens like dust from an ancient seal. One mark leads to another. One god leads to a council. One ruler leads to an older ruler. One human beginning leads to something that seems to have been waiting before humanity arrived. Perhaps the tablets do not reveal everything. Perhaps they were never meant to. Clay remembers what kings forget, because clay does not flatter the living. It waits under fallen walls, under reed ash, under the packed floors of houses where sandals once passed without ceremony. You stand inside the quiet remains of a scribal world, not in a golden palace, but in a room of benches, dust, and discipline. Here, boys and young men learn to press signs into damp tablets, while an older teacher watches with the patience of a man who has seen every possible mistake. The room smells of wet earth. It smells of hands, sweat, and river mud brought from the banks before sunrise. The tablets are soft at first, almost tender, like small pieces of the floodplain waiting to become memory. A reed stylus touches the surface, cuts a wedge, lifts, and returns again. Each mark seems simple alone. Together, they become labor lists, temple accounts, hymns, myths, treaties, curses, royal names, and the strange grammar of divine authority. Modern excavations at sites such as Nippur have shown how central scribal education was to Mesopotamian civilization. The University of Pennsylvania's long work in the region helped bring enormous numbers of tablets into scholarly view. Many were not glamorous objects. They were school exercises, word lists, mathematical problems, and repeated lines copied by students who probably sighed exactly as students do now. Different millennium, same complaint. The homework was just heavier. Yet from these schoolrooms, the older stories could survive. You can almost hear the rhythm of instruction. Copy the sign, repeat the word. Name the city, name the god, name the ruler, name the ancestor of the ruler. The scribal hand does more than record speech. It trains the mind to see the world as ordered, ranked, and measured. There is a place for grain, a place for workers, a place for priests, a place for gods, a place for kings who claim to stand closer to the divine than ordinary people ever could. This is where the idea of an Anunnaki bloodline becomes more delicate. The tablets do not hand you a neat secret family tree, wrapped in linen and stamped with a heavenly seal. They offer something stranger and more human. They reveal a civilization where legitimacy must be copied, taught, recited, and renewed. Power lives in performance. A ruler is not only born, he is announced, praised, inscribed, and placed inside a sacred chain. Records confirm that Sumerian city-states were built around temples, palace households, agricultural estates, and administrative labour. Scholars at Yale and Oxford have long studied how these institutions shaped the growth of early urban life. The evidence points to a society deeply concerned with control of food, water, offerings, land, and people. Behind every myth of cosmic order, there is also a storage jar. Behind every sacred title, there may be a ration list. This does not make the myths less powerful. It makes them more revealing. The scribe in the schoolroom is not merely preserving fantasy. He is preserving the language that allows society to explain itself. When a tablet names a god as patron of a city, it tells people why this city matters. When a hymn praises a king as chosen, it tells people why that king commands. When a myth describes divine beings shaping humanity for work, it tells people why work feels woven into existence itself. You run your fingers across a cooled brick wall, rough and crumbly beneath the skin. Outside, sunlight glares against the courtyard. A donkey brays somewhere beyond the gate. Someone laughs, then goes quiet as a senior official passes. In the corner, stacked tablets dry in rows. Some are tiny, fitting neatly into a palm. Others are larger, written with care, meant to last. The smallest marks carry old weight. A royal record may begin with titles that feel distant now. Yet they were once dangerous words. Mighty king, shepherd of the people, beloved of the god, chosen by heaven, builder of the temple. These phrases were not decoration. They were instruments. They transformed mud brick ambition into sacred duty. A king who rebuilt a temple could claim closeness to the divine household. A king who restored canals could present himself as caretaker of cosmic balance. A king who conquered a rival city could describe victory as the will of a god. The bloodline in this world is never only biological, it is political, ritual and literary. It is written into existence again and again. There is an open scholarly debate over how literally ancient audiences understood royal divine claims. Some researchers argue that these titles were symbolic tools of kingship. Others see evidence that sacred ancestry and divine election were felt with deep religious seriousness. The safest path is not to flatten the ancient mind into either fraud or innocence. People can believe and use belief at the same time. Humans are talented that way. Your mind drifts to the temple archive, where tablets lie in baskets, jars, or shelves. The building is not silent in its own age. It murmurs with officials, priests, labour supervisors, and messengers carrying sealed orders. The smell changes from wet clay to oil smoke and stored grain. There is wool stacked near one wall. There are jars with markings near another. Everything has a place, at least in theory. In theory is always doing heroic work. Somewhere in these records, a royal name appears. Perhaps the king sponsors a temple building. Perhaps he receives offerings. Perhaps he boasts of divine favour. The tablet does not explain every feeling behind the title, but it fixes the claim in the public world. Once written, the claim becomes harder to ignore. It becomes part of the city's memory, even if the king himself eventually becomes dust. This is why clay is so dangerous to forgetting. Oral praise fades when the singer dies. Palace banners rot. Statues lose faces. But clay, if fired by accident or preserved under collapse, may continue muttering beneath the earth for thousands of years. Fire destroys wood, but it can strengthen clay. Disaster becomes an archivist. A quirky fringe tidbit often attached to these scribal records is the idea that certain tablets contain coded references to royal hybrid descent. Mainstream scholars do not accept this as a proven reading. Still, the fascination persists because ancient kings did present themselves as more than ordinary men. They stood in a charged zone between human body and divine authorization, which is fertile ground for modern imagination. You can see how easily the misunderstanding begins. A text calls a ruler beloved of a goddess. Another says kingship descended from heaven. A myth describes divine beings deciding human fate. A later reader, hungry for hidden patterns, joins the pieces into a literal bloodline. The move is not academically secure, but it is emotionally understandable. The mind loves a secret corridor. Still, the better mystery is closer to the clay. Why did early cities need sacred paperwork so badly? Why did authority depend on inscriptions, rituals, archives, and trained readers? Why were divine names tied so closely to grain stores, labour crews, and royal houses? Perhaps because the first cities were not simple places. They were dense, noisy, unequal experiments in human cooperation. Someone had to explain why thousands should obey arrangements no village elder could personally enforce. The gods gave that explanation weight. The scribes gave it form in the late light. The schoolroom settles into quiet. The teacher stacks tablets with a weary hand. A student rubs clay from his fingers. Another looks toward the doorway, probably dreaming of food, sleep, or escape. They do not seem like guardians of hidden history. They seem like people at the end of a long day, but through them, the old system continues, the names are copied, the divine ranks are learned, the royal titles are preserved. The idea that power descends from above remains alive, not as a single secret, but as 1,000 repeated lessons pressed into mud. You leave the room slowly while the walls hold their heat. Behind you, the tablets dry in silence. Some will crumble, some will be broken, some will vanish into the market of antiquities many centuries later, which is less romantic and far more irritating than it sounds. A few will reach scholars, museums, and reading rooms, where patient eyes will follow the wedges again, and in those small marks the old question remains, not whether a perfect hidden bloodline can be traced without doubt, because the tablets do not grant that comfort. The question is why the earlier cities imagined authority as something descending from divine height into human hands. The scribes did not solve that mystery, and they preserved it. Before cities have names, there is only land, water, heat, and the slow stubbornness of survival. Your mind drifts away from the tablet room and toward an older horizon, one without palace walls or temple hymns, where the rivers change their paths and the marshes breathe under a wide white sky. The world feels unfinished, not empty, but still deciding what shape human life will take. You stand near the southern edge of Mesopotamia, where reeds crowd the wet ground and birds rise suddenly from pools of silver water. The air smells of mud, fish, smoke, and crushed plants. Farther inland, the land dries into pale dust. The wind lifts it gently, then throws it into your eyes as though the earth itself is mildly annoyed by visitors. There are no kings here yet. There are no royal titles, no divine genealogies, no carved boasts in the walls of temples. There are only small communities learning how to live with rivers that give and take without apology. Water can make grain grow, but it can also drown a field overnight. Mud can build a house, but rain and neglect can return it to nothing. Life is possible here, but only if people cooperate, remember, and obey the seasons. Archaeological research places the deep roots of southern Mesopotamian urban life in earlier farming and village cultures. Long before the classic Sumerian city-states became powerful, studies from institutions such as the University of Chicago's Oriental Institute, now known as the Institute for the Study of Ancient Cultures, have helped trace settlement growth, irrigation, craft production, and trade across this long transformation. The great cities did not appear from nowhere. They rose from generations of labour, adaptation, and experiment. That fact is simple, yet it changes everything. When later myths speak of a time before human order, they may be remembering something more than fantasy. Not a clear historical report, of course, and certainly not a modern timeline. But perhaps they preserve the feeling of an ancient transition, when human groups crossed from scattered settlements into something larger, stranger, and harder to escape. A village can remember faces, a city must invent systems. The Sumerian imagination often placed decisive beginnings in a remote age beyond normal memory. In some traditions, divine powers organize the world before humanity becomes fully visible. In others, kingship exists as a sacred principle before any ordinary king can receive it. The past becomes layered, with human history resting upon something older and less reachable. Long before recorded history in a time that is no longer remembered, the stories suggest that order already waits. It does not grow slowly from human hands, as archaeology might describe. It descends. It is assigned. It arrives from above like a decree carried through the air. That is the hidden timeline beginning to form. Not a timeline in the way a museum label gives dates, clean and polite. It is a mythic timeline, where cosmic decisions come first, then cities, then kings, then the ordinary breathing lives of workers. Such a timeline is not measured by carbon samples or pottery phases. It is measured by authority, who had power first, who gave it away, who received it, who was expected to bend beneath it. You walk across ground that might one day become a field, then a neighbourhood, and then a ruin. Beneath your feet, the future lies asleep. Pottery shards not yet broken, bricks not yet moulded, names not yet written. The landscape is quiet, but not peaceful in a soft way. It has the silence of something waiting to be claimed. A marsh insect whines near your ear. Charming little historian. In the old stories, the boundary between gods and humans is not always gentle. Divine beings make decisions far above ordinary life, while humans experience the consequences as hunger, labour, fertility, flood, and law. The Anunnaki belong to that upper layer of decision. They sit, judge, decree, receive offerings, or appear as part of a divine order that seems older than human settlement itself, here is where fringe interpretations often enter the reeds. Some modern readers imagine the pre-city age as evidence of lost advanced beings guiding early humanity from behind the curtain. They point to sudden urban growth, complex myths, and the astonishing invention of writing as clues to an external influence. Mainstream scholarship does not support that conclusion, but the emotional pull is easy to understand. A city rising from mud feels impossible enough without help. The open scholarly debate is more grounded, but still fascinating. Researchers continue to discuss how environmental pressures, irrigation demands, trade networks, religious institutions, and social inequality work together in the rise of the first Mesopotamian cities. No single explanation satisfies everyone. Some emphasize temple economies, some stress household production, some focus on climate and river behavior. Human complexity rarely enjoys being explained by one tidy cause. You feel that complexity in the air. Imagine families cutting reeds, repairing canals, shaping clay vessels, tending animals, burying their dead, and telling stories beside low fires. Their world is not primitive in the lazy sense. It is intelligent, attentive, and practical. They know the moods of water, they know the value of stored grain. They know that survival depends on patterns remembered across generations. Before written law, there is habit. Before kingship, there is coordination. Yet as settlements grow, coordination hardens. Someone measures, someone records, someone distributes, someone commands labour at the canal, someone decides which field receives water first. These decisions need justification, because people notice unfairness very quickly. People have always been excellent at noticing when someone else gets more beer. Into this pressure, myth offers a deeper order. If the gods designed the world, then the city is not merely an arrangement of mud bricks. It is a reflection of the cosmos. If kingship descends from heaven, then rule is not merely one strong man's success. It is a sacred office. If human labour begins in a divine decision, then toil is not only social necessity, it becomes part of the structure of existence. This is where the idea of the bloodline begins to shift again. In the oldest layers of imagination, the chosen ruler does not simply inherit land, he inherits proximity to the first order. His body becomes a meeting point between the visible city and the unseen beginning. Whether the claim is literal, symbolic, or both, it tells people that certain humans stand nearer to the source. Nearness matters. It makes hierarchy feel ancient. A ruler can say, or have others say for him, that his authority is not newly invented. It belongs to a chain stretching back into the mist before cities had names. That claim does not require proof in the modern sense. It requires ritual, repetition, and enough people willing to live inside the story. The Sumerian King List will one day give this feeling a strange written shape, naming cities where kingship rested and rulers whose reigns extend beyond ordinary human life. But even without naming that list too heavily, you can feel the pattern emerging. There is always an earlier place. There is always a first city, a first rule, a first descent, a first arrangement that makes later power seem inherited rather than seized. The land darkens as evening comes over the marsh. Fires appear near reed houses. Smoke rises in thin blue strands. A child carries something in a basket. A woman bends near the water, her reflection breaking in the current. No one here knows that future scribes will turn beginnings into sacred memory. No one knows that later generations will imagine divine counsels behind the hard facts of canal mud and grain storage. Still, the feeling is already present. The world is dangerous. Order is precious. Authority needs roots deeper than yesterday. So the roots are sent downward into myth and upward into heaven, until human rule appears suspended between the two. The Anunnaki become part of that architecture, not as a simple answer, but as guardians of an older layer of meaning. Perhaps the hidden truth is not a buried royal family waiting to be named. Perhaps it is the discovery that civilization has always needed a story older than itself. Before walls, before inscriptions, before crowns, people lived under sky, river, hunger, and fear. Then slowly, very slowly, they built systems strong enough to command them. And then they imagined those systems had existed before humanity began. The descent of powerful ones begins not with blazing skies, but with silence inside a temple court. You stand where packed earth meets brick, where offerings are carried in bowls, and where the scent of oil, dates, wool, and smoke gathers under the morning heat. The city around you is awake, yet the sacred enclosure feels slightly apart from ordinary life, as if sound itself lowers its voice before entering. A priest passes near the doorway. His steps are soft. He does not look theatrical. He looks tired, careful, and accustomed to rules older than his own grandfather's bones. Behind him, a statue waits in the inner room, dressed and fed as if it breathes. The god is not an abstract idea here. The god has a house, a meal, a schedule, a bed, servants, and property. Divine power is managed with astonishing practicality. This is how the Anunnaki enter the human world, not as a simple tribe of strange beings, but as part of a dense sacred administration. In Sumerian and Akkadian traditions, they appear among great divine powers, associated with judgment, fate, the underworld, cosmic authority, and the ordered ranks of heaven and earth. They are not always described in one fixed way, which is inconvenient for anyone wanting a neat chart. Ancient religion rather rudely refuses to become a modern filing cabinet. Records from Mesopotamia confirm that gods were organized into divine families, councils, and hierarchies across many cities. Scholars at Harvard, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied how these divine networks changed over time, as local cults, political alliances, and imperial ambitions reshaped sacred stories. A god's prominence could rise with a city. A divine genealogy could mirror earthly power. Theology and politics often shared the same table, although they may not have admitted it politely. You feel the weight of that system as you look toward the temple's shadowed center. The Anunnaki are not merely characters in myth. They are part of a language of authority. They can represent the great ones who decide, the hidden ones who judge, the ancient powers who stand behind visible events. When their name appears, it often suggests rank, distance, and seriousness. They belong above ordinary reach, yet they are not entirely unreachable. Offerings move toward them. Prayers rise toward them. Kings invoke them. Scribes place them into hymns and myths, where they sit in assembly, receive decrees, or stand among the forces shaping human destiny. In this world, the divine is both intimate and terrifying. It smells the incense placed before it, but it also controls death, drought, fertility, kingship, and the final boundaries of human hope. For a moment, it feels as though the temple bricks themselves understand hierarchy. Lower rooms support higher platforms. Courtyards lead inward. Doorways narrow. Each step draws you closer to a presence that ordinary people may not fully see. The building teaches the body how to approach power, slowly, carefully, with clean hands and a quiet mouth. The fringed tidbit appears here like a moth near a lamp. Some modern interpreters claim that the Anunnaki were not gods in the ancient religious sense, but physical visitors whose memory became myth. They read divine descent as arrival, sacred assembly as command structure, and human creation stories as evidence of intervention. Mainstream historians do not accept this as established evidence, but the theory persists because the texts describe power descending from a realm beyond ordinary human control. The attraction is understandable. The tablets feel suggestive. Still, the older question is subtler. Why did ancient people imagine ultimate authority as a council? Why not one simple power, one single voice, one heavenly ruler with a tidy staff meeting and excellent minutes instead? Mesopotamian mythology often gives you assemblies, debates, competing wills, divine households, and conflicts among gods. The cosmos feels organized, but also political. That is deeply revealing. The open scholarly debate concerns how these divine assemblies reflect early social experience. Some researchers see them as projections of human councils, temple institutions, and ruling elites. Others argue that mythic councils shaped how people imagined real governance, making earthly hierarchy seem like an echo of heaven. The direction is difficult to prove, Did people model gods after rulers, or rulers after gods? Perhaps both mirrors faced each other until no one could tell where the reflection began. You step into a cooler passage. The wall brushes your shoulder with roughness. Outside, a donkey cart creaks past the gate. Inside, the air holds the heavy sweetness of incense and the mineral scent of old plaster. A small lamp flickers near a niche, and the flame trembles as if it has heard something you have not. The Anunnaki, as remembered in sacred texts, seem to gather at the edge of knowledge. They are connected to fate, judgment, and the weight of decisions. They are not always the gods who receive the longest songs, yet their presence gives depth to the divine world. They feel like the old court behind the court, the larger authority behind the visible face of power. This matters for the bloodline mystery because kingship does not need only a patron. It needs a structure above the patron. A ruler may claim favour from one god, but the system of rule must appear approved by the greater order. The Anunnaki help create that atmosphere. They suggest that human authority is not floating alone. It is anchored in a council of ancient powers, a remembered architecture of decision. A king does not merely rule people, he participates in order, or at least that is the story, and stories can build stronger walls than brick. When a ruler calls himself chosen, beloved, shepherd, or servant of the gods, he places his body inside a sacred ladder. His blood becomes less important than his position, yet blood still matters because succession must pass through bodies. A throne needs a son, a brother, a daughter, a marriage, an heir. Divine favour must find a human vessel. There lies the strange tension. The gods may be eternal, but dynasties are embarrassingly breakable. A royal child may die, a brother may rebel, a queen may carry legitimacy into another house, a conqueror may take a city, and then claim the city's god wanted it all along, which is wonderfully convenient. The divine system must be flexible enough to survive human chaos. The Anunnaki become useful in that flexibility because they stand above any single household. They are older than one reign, older than one palace, older than one charmingly overconfident king. When rulers invoke the great divine order, they are reaching past local politics towards something deeper, something that makes their authority seem inevitable. You may imagine the assembly as the ancient mind's answer to uncertainty. Crops fail, rivers shift, children die, enemies come, kings boast, then vanish. Yet beyond the visible disorder, the stories insist there is a hidden council, a place where destinies are assigned. That belief may comfort, it may also frighten. If fate is decided elsewhere, then human freedom becomes a small lamp in a very large room. The temple court grows brighter as the sun climbs. Workers enter with baskets. A musician tunes a stringed instrument. An official checks seals on storage jars. The sacred and ordinary mingle without embarrassment. Someone may be praying for fertility while someone else calculates barley rations. The gods receive hymns, but also flour. This is not a contradiction. It is Mesopotamia. The truth about the Anunnaki bloodline, if such a phrase can be used gently, begins to look less like a secret family hidden behind history and more like a sacred pattern imposed upon society. Divine beings stand above. Cities serve below. Kings claim a place between. Priests maintain the connection. Scribes preserve the words that make the connection feel ancient. And humanity watches, humanity works. Humanity wonders whether its own beginning was chosen, assigned, or manufactured by powers that stood beyond the river haze. Perhaps the Anunnaki are best approached not as a solved identity, but as a pressure in the ancient imagination. They are the weight above the crown, the shadow behind the temple, the silent judges in the background of human ambition. The day continues, the incense thins, dust turns in a shaft of light near the door. Nothing descends now except heat, yet the idea remains, somewhere above the visible city, beyond brick, field, and breath. The old powers are imagined as seated, listening, deciding, and that is enough to change the world beneath them. Blood, clay, and human purpose gather together in the old stories like three substances placed in one dark bowl. You're no longer watching power from the temple courtyard. You're moving deeper into the mythic chamber, where humanity itself becomes a question, shaped not by comfort, but by need. The air seems thicker here, warmer, and full of the smell of damp earth. The ancient texts do not begin with human pride. They begin with pressure. In Mesopotamian creation traditions, human beings are often explained through labour. The gods require relief from burdens. The canals must be maintained. Food must be provided. Temples must be served. Human life enters the story not as a glorious arrival, but as a practical solution to divine exhaustion. It is a humbling thought, rather rude actually, that humanity may have been imagined as the universe's replacement workforce. You stand beside a pit of wet clay near the riverbank. A worker kneads it with his heels, turning mud into material. His feet sink and rise with soft sounds. The clay is cold below the surface, though the day is hot. It clings to skin and refuses to leave quietly. Soon it will become bricks, bowls, tablets, walls, seals, ovens, and gods in miniature form. Clay is everywhere in this world. It is also the perfect substance for a myth of making. It comes from river mud, from the meeting of water and earth. It can be shaped by hands. It can be dried, fired, broken, buried, and found again. A human body, fragile and formed from earthly matter, feels strangely close to it. The metaphor is so natural that it barely feels invented. Records of Mesopotamian myth confirm that some traditions describe humans being formed from clay mixed with a divine element. Scholars at universities such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these stories through tablets written in Sumerian and Akkadian. The details vary across texts, but the recurring idea is unmistakable. Humanity is made to take up work within a cosmic economy. The important word is economy. Not coins, not markets in the modern sense, but exchange, service, obligation, and maintenance. Humans offer food to the gods. Temples organize labour. Fields feed cities. Cities glorify divine patrons. The gods grant order, fertility, victory, and legitimacy. Everyone owes something to someone, and the universe itself seems built from debt. Your fingers brush a clay vessel drying in the sun. It is rough, imperfect, and marked by the potter's hand. In this small object, the myth becomes easier to understand. To be created from clay is not simply to be lowly, it is to be useful, shapeable, and tied to the land. To contain a divine ingredient is not simply to be noble. It is to carry a burden, because sacred mixture creates obligation. The Anunnaki stand near this idea like shadows at the edge of a fire. In some later Akkadian traditions, divine beings debate the problem of labour and human creation. In related mythic worlds, a god may be sacrificed or a divine substance used so that human life can arise. These stories do not read like laboratory reports, despite what the more excitable corners of the internet might prefer. They read like sacred explanations for why humans suffer, work, build, worship, and die. Still, the bloodline question returns. If humanity is made from clay and divine substance, then every human being carries some trace of the upper world in mythic imagination. The bloodline is not only royal, it becomes universal, though unevenly understood. Ordinary people may be fashioned for labour, yet rulers claim a more focused closeness to the gods. The king is human like everyone else, but he is presented as a brighter vessel, a chosen body through which heavenly order touches earth. That tension is powerful. It is also convenient. A society that imagines all humans as divinely formed can still rank them sharply. Farmers work the fields, temple servants grind flour, soldiers carry weapons, scribes press signs, priests guard ritual, kings embody cosmic order at the top. Everyone may come from sacred clay, but some clay receives much better publicity. The quirky fringe tidbit here is that modern theorists often seize upon the mixture of clay and divine blood as proof of ancient genetic engineering. They imagine the Anunnaki altering early humans, creating a servant species, and leaving behind a hidden lineage among rulers. Mainstream scholars reject that as unsupported by the texts and archaeology. Yet the reason the claim survives is clear. The myths use bodily language, and bodily language invites literal reading. Ancient language is rarely so obedient. Blood can mean life, kinship, sacrifice, violence, legitimacy, essence, or divine presence. Clay can mean earth, flesh, humility, craft, or mortality. When a myth joins them, it may be speaking through symbol rather than science. But symbols are not weak things. They organize civilizations, they place human pain inside a meaningful pattern, which can be more powerful than any simple fact. An open scholarly debate continues around how these creation myths relate to actual labor systems in early Mesopotamia. Some researchers see them as religious reflections of temple economies and corvée labor, where communities owed work to institutions. Others argue that the myths preserve deeper theological questions about dependence, mortality, and divine justice. The boundary between social explanation and spiritual reflection remains difficult to draw. You hear the sound of baskets being lifted nearby, reeds scrape against shoulders, men and women move mud from the river's edge toward a building site. Their labour is steady, repetitive, and unsentimental. Nobody looks especially mythic while carrying clay in the heat. That is precisely what makes the myth feel so sharp. It takes ordinary exhaustion and gives it a cosmic origin. Perhaps people told these stories because work needed explanation. Perhaps suffering needed one too. A canal wall collapses, a field floods, a child grows feverish, a ruler demands more grain, a temple requires more offerings. Human life presses down from every side. The myth says this pressure is not meaningless. It began in the arrangement of the world. You may not like your burden, but at least it has a place in the design. That idea can comfort the tired. It can also trap them. If labour was assigned at creation, then complaint may seem like rebellion against heaven. If kings and priests stand closer to divine intent, then their commands may sound like echoes of the first decree. Here, the bloodline becomes a social tool. It marks not only who is descended from whom, but who may claim to understand why humanity exists at all. You move from the riverbank toward a low kiln. Heat shimmers around its mouth. Bricks are stacked nearby, each one stamped with marks declaring ownership, patronage, or royal ambition. A brick is humble until a king stamps it. Then it becomes propaganda with corners, built into a temple wall. It repeats his name in silence for centuries. So too with human bodies in the royal imagination. A ruler's body can be stamped with divine selection through titles, rituals, birth stories, and priestly approval. The blood inside him may be ordinary red, but the story around it changes everything. People do not see blood directly. They see symbols. They see clothing, crowns, seals, processions, and tablets that say what the body means. The older creation myths make this possible because they already imagine humanity as crafted under divine supervision. Once all humans are made within a sacred order, elite humans can claim special placement inside that order. The leap is not large. It is a quiet step upward, taken in sandals over polished temple floors. Your mind lingers on the clay itself. It accepts the hand, but it also remembers pressure. Every wedge mark on a tablet is a small wound that becomes language. Every brick bears the force of a mould. Every statue begins as shaped matter. The ancient world understood that form comes through pressure, and perhaps it imagined humanity the same way. Made under pressure, made for burden, made with something dangerous hidden inside. And so the truth beneath the Anunnaki bloodline grows more unsettling. Not because it proves a secret race of rulers, but because it reveals a civilization thinking deeply about control. Who made humans, who owns their labour, who speaks for the powers that shaped them, who benefits when creation itself becomes an argument for obedience. The evening lowers over the work site. The clay cools slowly. The workers wash their legs in brown water, laughing softly at some joke already lost to time. They are not symbols to themselves. They are hungry, tired, alive, and probably hoping tomorrow is less annoying. But in the tablets, their labour becomes sacred memory. Their aching backs become part of a cosmic story. Their humanity is shaped from earth and touched by divinity, caught between mud and heaven, service and mystery. Perhaps that is the oldest bloodline of all. Not royal descent, not hidden inheritance, only the fragile human mixture of dust, breath, labour, and longing, pressed into the world by hands no one can quite see. Kingship lowered from heaven, the old line says, and the sentence falls with the weight of a sealed door. You stand now before one of the strangest ideas preserved from ancient Mesopotamia, an idea so calm in its wording that its danger can almost be missed. Rule does not begin as a human bargain. It does not rise from a crowd, a battlefield, or a clever family around a dinner table. It comes down. The sky gives authority, the earth receives it. This is the world of the Sumerian King List, a remarkable composition copied by scribes across centuries. Its surviving versions name cities, rulers, dynasties, and reign lengths, arranging power into a sequence that stretches from a mythic deep past into more recognizable historical memory. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied its language, structure, and political purpose. They agree on one thing with quiet confidence. It is not a simple history book. It is stranger than that. It is history arranged as sacred order. It remembers some real kings, folds them into legend, and places them inside a pattern where kingship moves from city to city. A ruler may die, a dynasty may end, a city may fall, but kingship itself survives. It travels, it rests here, then there. It behaves almost like a divine object, a heavenly office that human bodies carry for a while, badly or well, until it moves again. You imagine a scribe copying the list in a warm room, his hand steady, his eyes trained by years of repetition. He writes the names of places that feel ancient even to him. Eridu, Bad Tibira, Larak, Sippar, Shuruppak. The words carry a rhythm like footsteps crossing an enormous distance. Then come kings whose reigns stretch across thousands of years. Impossible spans that belong less to ordinary biography than to mythic time. A king reigns for 28,800 years. That is not a typo you gently correct with a red pen. It is a sign that the text has entered a different atmosphere. The long reigns before the flood do not ask to be measured like tax records. They place early kingship beyond common memory, in an age where human authority was larger, older, and closer to divine arrangement. The scale itself becomes a message. The first rulers were not like us. The beginning was vast. The mainstream historical fact is firm enough. The Sumerian King List includes rulers who are known from other inscriptions, such as figures connected with early dynastic city-states, but it also includes legendary reigns and political shaping. Researchers often see it as an attempt to create unity from competing local traditions. Many cities claimed importance. The list organizes that competition into a single sacred sequence. That is clever, almost suspiciously clever. If kingship descends from heaven, then the city holding it becomes more than powerful. It becomes chosen. If kingship later moves away, then defeat can be explained without destroying the concept of divine order. The office remains pure, even when the city loses it. Human disaster becomes part of a larger transfer, very tidy, very useful. One suspects the rulers appreciated the elegance. You step into an imagined archive where such a tablet might rest among others. The light is dim. Dust thickens near the roof beams. A reed mat crackles under your feet. Somewhere outside, a market stirs with voices, animals, carts, and bargaining. Inside, the list lies in silence, naming centuries like beads on a cord. Each name is a claim. Each city is a stage. The bloodline question returns through the side door, softly but insistently. If kingship is heavenly, then royal families become the containers of a descending force. A dynasty does not merely inherit property, it receives custody of an office older than itself. The king's body becomes temporary housing for something that began above the human world. His children may inherit not only power, but the story that power has chosen their blood. Yet the king list complicates the idea of one unbroken bloodline. Kingship moves between cities. Dynasties rise and vanish. The sacred office travels through history like a flame passed between lamps. This does not support a simple hidden family ruling forever from the shadows. It suggests a deeper pattern, where divine authority can be claimed, transferred, restored, and rewritten by those able to control the story. The quirky fringe tidbit is easy to find here because the enormous pre-flood rains have inspired generations of speculation. Some modern writers treat them as evidence of superhuman rulers, long-lived hybrids, or descendants of the Anunnaki. The mainstream reading is more cautious. Large numbers in ancient texts often serve symbolic, theological, or literary purposes. Still, those numbers do have a peculiar power. They make ordinary history feel as if it rests on the bones of giants. The old scribes knew drama. They simply wrote it in numbers. An open scholarly debate remains over the exact purpose of the King List in its different versions. Some historians interpret it as political propaganda supporting the idea of one legitimate kingship at a time. Others view it as a scholarly attempt to organize inherited traditions. Some emphasize its mythological framing, especially the division between before and after the flood. The text resists being only one thing, which is inconsiderate of it, but wonderful for mystery. You can feel the list working on the imagination. It tells the listener that history has an architecture. First, kingship descends, then cities receive it, then rulers reign for spans beyond normal life, then disaster comes, then kingship descends again. The pattern is not random, it is cyclical, solemn, and almost liturgical. Power appears, power settles, power departs. In such a system, human rulers are both exalted and small. They stand in the place of heaven's gift, yet they remain replaceable. The office outlives them. Their names may be copied, praised, corrected, forgotten, or broken away from the clay. Kingship itself continues, moving through the world like a shadow with a crown. This is where the Anunnaki atmosphere deepens. The divine assembly, the heavenly order, the ancient judges of fate, all of them belong to the same mental universe as the descending kingship. Whether named directly, or hovering in the sacred background, they help explain why rule must come from beyond ordinary human agreement. Authority is not merely negotiated, it is delivered. You walk in the dusk through a city gate where guards lean on spears and dust gathers on their sandals. Above them, the king's name may be stamped on bricks, carved into stone, or spoken in a ritual. A farmer passing through does not need to understand every myth. He needs to know who collects grain, who commands soldiers, who builds temples, and whose seal can ruin his afternoon. But the myth matters. It makes collection sacred. It makes command ancient. A king backed only by force must keep proving himself. A king backed by heaven borrows the patience of eternity. Even when people grumble, and people always grumble, the system around him whispers that obedience is part of the world's structure. The bloodline becomes a visible thread attached to an invisible pattern. Still, the King List also carries a quiet warning for rulers. No city holds kingship forever. The heavenly office can leave. Divine favor can move. The line that crowns one dynasty can abandon it. The list preserves grandeur, but also impermanence. Every ruler named inside it is already past. Every reign, even the impossible ones, has ended. This is unsettling in a gentle way. The tablet praises kingship by showing its movement. It honors rulers by arranging their disappearance. It gives ancient power a sequence, but also turns that sequence into a graveyard of names. To be written in the list is to be remembered and reduced at the same time. Night thickens beyond the archive. A lamp burns low near the scribe's hand. He presses another sign, then another. He may not know whether he is copying truth, tradition, propaganda, or sacred poetry. Perhaps those categories do not divide cleanly for him. He copies because the line was given. He copies because the list must continue. And in that continuing, the hidden truth becomes less like a locked secret and more like a method. The old world made power feel eternal by giving it a heavenly origin. It made dynasties feel chosen by placing them inside a descending order. It made human rulers seem like heirs to something that began before ordinary time. Perhaps no bloodline can be followed without break. Perhaps the real line is kingship itself. It descends, it moves, it crowns, it abandons, and it waits for the next city willing to say that heaven has chosen it. Priests guard the hidden line not because they hold swords, but because they hold meanings. You enter the sacred precinct at now when the city is neither fully awake nor fully asleep. The sky is pale, the air is cool enough to feel merciful. Somewhere beyond the temple wall, bakers rake coals, donkeys complain, and a child is told to hurry in a tone that has survived every civilization. Inside the enclosure, movement is slower. Water is poured, hands are washed, a door opens with a wooden groan, and the smell of oil, wool, incense, and old brick moves outward into the morning. The temple is not merely a place of prayer, it is a household, an office, a treasury, a workshop, a granary, a stage, and a memory machine. It feeds the gods, pays workers, receives offerings, stores goods, and teaches the city how power should look. The priests do not invent kingship alone, they shape its reflection. In ancient Mesopotamia, temple institutions played a major role in economic and ritual life. Records studied by scholars at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, and the University of Chicago confirm that temples managed land, labor, offerings, livestock, and craft production. They also preserved hymns, calendars, ritual duties, and lists of divine names. A temple was not only sacred architecture, it was an engine of social order. You stand near a storage room where jars sit in rows, each sealed, marked, and watched. The clay seal is small, but it carries authority. Break it without permission, and the matter is not just theft. It becomes an offence against the order that the temple claims to protect. Even the storage rooms feel theological. Grain becomes piety. Oil becomes obligation. Wool becomes a thread in the divine economy. This is where bloodlines become visible without ever needing to speak plainly. A royal house may claim divine favour, but temple ritual helps that claim breathe. Priests perform offerings for the king. Priestesses hold offices tied to elite families. Sacred marriage rites, dedication ceremonies, and building rituals can bind a ruler to a god with gestures older than the current political crisis. And there is always a current political crisis. Kings were not exactly known for relaxing. Your mind drifts to a procession crossing the courtyard. Musicians walk slowly. Officials carry objects wrapped in cloth. A priest murmurs a formula. The king appears not as a private man, with worries, appetite, irritation, and sore feet, but as a prepared body, washed, clothed, scented, watched. His humanity is still there, but it has been covered by ritual. That covering matters. It makes him readable. People do not see the blood inside his veins. They see the signs arranged around him. They see the crown, the robe, the offering, the priestly approval, the temple doorway receiving him. In a world where symbols teach reality, this becomes almost as strong as ancestry itself. The ruler is placed where only the legitimate should stand, so legitimacy seems to gather around his body. A mainstream historical fact rests quietly beneath this scene. Mesopotamian rulers often used temple building and restoration to declare piety and authority. Inscriptions from kings across different periods describe the construction of temples, the dedication of offerings, and the favour of major gods. These records are not casual notes. They are political theology pressed into clay, stone, and brick. A ruler who builds for the gods does more than donate generously. He enters sacred memory. His name is embedded into walls where future generations may find it. He becomes part of the god's house, not by blood alone, but by labour, wealth, and inscription. It is a very expensive way to say, please remember me kindly. The Anunnaki bloodline, viewed through this temple world, becomes less like a single secret inheritance, and more like a guarded grammar of legitimacy. The priests know the correct offerings, the scribes know the correct names, the ritual experts know the correct calendar. The royal family knows it must be seen inside this system. Without the temple, royal descent is merely family pride. With the temple, it becomes cosmic alignment. Still, the human side remains close enough to touch. Priests are not floating spirits. They worry about supplies, status, appointments, mistakes, rival families, and the ever-popular problem of who gets access to wealth. Sacred offices could be prestigious. They could also be political tools. Families place sons and daughters within temple systems, linking private ambition to public holiness. There is a quirky fringe tidbit that certain modern writers interpret elite priestly families as guardians of Anunnaki genetics, preserving hidden descent through carefully managed marriage. Mainstream scholarship does not support that claim as a literal biological program. Yet ancient temples did preserve elite continuity in a different way. They maintained titles, archives, rights, and inherited offices that allowed certain families to remain close to power for generations. That is not alien genetics. It is bureaucracy with incense. The open scholarly debate concerns how temple and palace power balanced each other in different periods of Mesopotamian history. Some historians emphasize the temple as the dominant early institution. Others argue that palace households, private estates, and military leadership became increasingly important. The evidence changes by city, century, and archive. The old world refuses to hold still for our simple diagrams. You move into a chamber where tablets lie stacked near a wall. Some record offerings, some track workers, some preserve hymns. Some may name women of high status dedicated to divine service, such as royal daughters placed in powerful priestess roles. These women could embody alliances between palace and temple, flesh and ritual, family and god. Their lives show that sacred authority did not always pass through kings alone. The bloodline has sisters, it has daughters, it has women whose bodies and titles carried dynastic meaning in ways that later storytellers sometimes flatten or forget. A princess placed in a temple office could anchor a royal house inside a sacred city. A high priestess could stand as living proof that a dynasty belonged within the god's favour. Her role might be restricted by ritual, but it was not small. In a world of signs, she was a sign made human. The temple corridors grow warmer as the sun rises. Dusk brightens in the light. A servant sweeps slowly, moving yesterday's ash from the threshold. The sound is soft, almost hypnotic. Beyond the wall, the city pulls itself into labour. Potters turn wheels. Brewers stir vats. Traders argue. Officials seal tablets. The god's house remains at the centre, receiving the day as if the city exists to keep it alive. Perhaps that is exactly what the city was taught to believe. The Anunnaki, as part of the Great Divine Order, stand behind this arrangement like distant witnesses. They are not needed in every ritual line to shape the atmosphere. The idea that divine powers govern fate, rank, and legitimacy makes the temple a place where invisible decisions become visible. A king may claim that heaven supports him, but the temple teaches the city how to see that support. It is a theatre, yes, but theatre can become truth. Not false truth? Exactly. Social truth. The kind that changes where people stand, what they carry, who eats first, who commands, who kneels, and whose name survives. The temple does not simply reflect society. It trains society's imagination. It says that there are levels to the world. It says some doors are ordinary, and some are not. It says some bodies may enter where others wait outside. There, in the waiting, hierarchy becomes physical. You feel it in the distance between courtyard and sanctuary. You feel it in the difference between the worker carrying barley and the priest receiving it. You feel it in the king's controlled approach to the divine room. The bloodline is not hidden because no one sees it. It is hidden because everyone sees only its performance, not the machinery beneath. At twilight, the temple cools again. Lamps are lit. The statue is tended. The day's records are stored. A priest seals a container with careful pressure, leaving a mark that says the contents belong within an order larger than hunger. The gesture is small, but it holds the pattern of the whole city. The sacred line is guarded by repetition, by washing, by offerings, by names copied correctly, doors opened at the correct hour, and bodies placed in the correct relation to the gods, whether or not one imagines literal Anunnaki descent. The temple reveals how divine blood could become a social reality, not through veins alone, but through rites that made certain families appear chosen, purified, and necessary. And in the quiet after the final offering, when the incense fades into the dark beams overhead, the old system seems to breathe by itself. The priests withdraw, the seals harden, the god remains fed. The city sleeps beneath the idea that heaven has a house on earth, and that some human blood stands nearer to its door. The flood divides memory, as if the world itself once drew a line through time with water. You stand beneath a sky heavy with heat. near the edge of a settlement where reeds bend in the damp wind. The ground is soft underfoot. The river is swollen, brown, restless, and too close to the houses. People glance toward it often, with the uneasy respect given to something that feeds them and might also erase them. The air smells of rain. That is never innocent here. In southern Mesopotamia, water is not background scenery. It is power with movement. It fills canals, ripens fields, carries boats, rots foundations, spreads disease, and makes the difference between abundance and hunger. The river gives grain to the city, then quietly reminds everyone that the arrangement is temporary. You may build walls, you may carve seals, you may praise kings. Water remains unimpressed. Ancient Mesopotamian flood traditions appear in several forms, including accounts connected to the Sumerian King List and later Akkadian literature. Scholars at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have studied these stories as part of a wider ancient Near Eastern memory of catastrophic flooding, divine judgment, and survival through chosen figures. The texts vary in detail, yet the pattern remains haunting. A world exists, a flood comes, a remnant survives, authority begins again. That pattern matters. It turns disaster into a hinge. Before the flood, the King List places rulers with impossibly long reigns, cities older than normal history, and kingship descending from heaven into a mythic world. After the flood, kingship descends again, and the reigns gradually move closer to human scale. The flood does not merely destroy buildings, it separates sacred deep time from the more recognizable world of dynasties, rivalry, and written memory. You feel that division in the landscape. The clouds gather low, purple at the edges, while villagers drag belongings onto higher ground. A goat refuses to cooperate, because goats have contributed to human suffering with remarkable consistency. Children are pulled indoors. Clay jars are lifted onto platforms. A man checks the bindings of a reed boat. A woman presses a bundle against her chest and watches the river without speaking. There is no thunder yet, only waiting. In mythic terms, the flood becomes a cleansing and a cancellation. It wipes away the old arrangement, then makes room for a new one. That is why it is so important for the bloodline question. If divine authority existed before the flood, and kingship returned afterward, then someone or something must bridge the rupture. Survival becomes legitimacy. The one who passes through disaster carries more than breath. He carries continuity. In the Sumerian Flood tradition, a figure often identified by scholars as Ziusudra receives warning, survives the waters, and is granted a special fate. Later, Mesopotamian versions present related survivor figures with different names and details. The story changes across time, but the function is similar. One human is preserved when the world is overwhelmed. Through him, memory and order continue. This is where the hidden line takes a quieter shape. Not a line of perfect descent proven through records, because the evidence does not allow that certainty. Instead, it is a line of survival, a sacred thread drawn through catastrophe. The survivor becomes the living answer to a terrible question. If the old world drowned, why are we still here? Because someone was chosen? Because someone heard? Because someone carried the beginning across the water? The quirky fringe tidbit here is that some modern writers connect the flood survivor to an Anunnaki protection program, imagining that a chosen bloodline was deliberately preserved from destruction. Mainstream scholars do not accept that as a historical claim. Still, the idea clings to the story because the ancient texts already contain selection, warning, secrecy, and survival. Those are powerful ingredients. Add a missing line or two, and speculation arrives wearing sandals. The more grounded mystery is still astonishing. Why did Mesopotamian tradition divide history around a flood so dramatically? Archaeology has identified local flood deposits at some ancient sites, though not one single universal event across all Mesopotamia. Researchers continue to debate how memories of real river disasters may have merged with theology, storytelling, and political ideology. A flood in life can become a flood in memory, and memory is rarely content to remain modest. You step closer to the water's edge. The current claws at reeds and carries broken branches past your feet. The surface looks almost oily beneath the darkening sky. Somewhere upstream, rain may already be falling. Somewhere in the city, a priest may be making offerings. Somewhere in a royal house, officials may be wondering whether the granaries stand high enough. Fear makes everyone practical, even the pious Count Sax. The flood story also changes the meaning of kingship. If rule descends from heaven before the flood, then its return after the flood suggests divine order cannot be destroyed by water. Human settlements may vanish, clay walls may melt, names may be lost, but kingship returns, as if the office itself floats above disaster until the earth is ready again. That idea gives later rulers a magnificent inheritance. They do not merely rule a city, they participate in the restoration of the world. It is grand. It is also useful. A ruler who claims ancient continuity after chaos can present himself as more than ambitious. He becomes the answer to disorder. He stands against the flood, even when the flood is only political collapse, famine, invasion, or civil unrest. The old water becomes a metaphor available to every dynasty that wants to look necessary. Your ears catch a low sound now, perhaps distant thunder, perhaps a cart crossing planks, perhaps only imagination. The air tightens. The first drops strike the dust, making dark circles that vanish quickly. Then more drops come. The smell rises rich and metallic from the ground. People move faster. The flood in myth is not only water, it is the fear that the human order can fail completely. Cities depend on walls, storage, calendars, rules, and repeated trust. A flood laughs at these arrangements. It turns streets into channels. It lifts bodies from their places. It makes the built world temporary again. Against such terror, the story offers structure. The gods decide, a warning is given, a vessel is built, life survives, sacrifice is made, order returns. The story does not make disaster gentle, but it makes it legible. It says the world has broken before and still the pattern came back. This is why the flood sits so deeply in the Anunnaki atmosphere. Divine beings may appear as judges, decreers, or members of the hidden order behind human fate. Whether they destroy, permit, or witness catastrophe, their presence gives the disaster cosmic depth. The flood is not merely weather, it is a verdict written in water. An open scholarly debate remains over how flood stories travelled, transformed, and influenced later traditions across the ancient Near East. Some historians emphasize shared environmental experience in riverine societies. Others trace literary borrowing among scribal cultures. Some focus on theology, seeing the flood as a way to explain divine justice and human vulnerability. Each view carries part of the truth, though none fully drains the mystery. You watch the rain thicken. It drums on reed roofs, spatters clay walls, and gathers in the tracks of carts. A dog slips under a doorway. Someone shouts a name. The river lifts by inches, and those inches contain the entire anxiety of civilization. It takes generations to build a city. Water only needs patience. In this moment, the hidden bloodline no longer feels like a glamorous secret. It feels like a question asked during disaster. What survives when the world is washed clean? A body, a boat, a name, a story, a claim that someone was chosen by powers too high to challenge. Perhaps that is why flood survivors matter so much. They stand at the crossing between lost time and remembered time. They carry the old world without fully explaining it. They become proof that destruction was not the final sentence. Through them, kingship can descend again, temples can reopen, fields can be measured, and children can be told that the world once ended, but not entirely. The rain eases near midnight. The clouds move slowly east. Water glimmers between houses. The city smells of mud, smoke, wet animals, and relief not yet trusted. People will wake to damage. They will repair walls. They will count the missing. They will argue about what the flood meant, because humans begin interpreting disaster almost before the ground dries. And somewhere, in the long sleep of tradition, the flood becomes the great dividing mark. Before it, the old age of impossible rains and immense beginnings. After it, the fragile continuation of rule, ritual, labour, and memory. The waters close over certainty, leaving only fragments floating toward us. Perhaps the line was never hidden in blood alone. Perhaps it was hidden in survival. Giants in the margins appear first as a feeling, not as a clear body standing in the road. You sense them in the broken edges of stories, in the oversized reigns of ancient kings, in the whispered distance between ordinary people and the powers said to have shaped them. They are not always named directly. They hover where myth grows large enough to cast a human shadow. You walk through a city at dusk, when walls turn copper and the streets narrow into bands of shade. The day's heat still clings to the bricks. A smell of beer, mash, smoke, and animal dung rises from courtyards. Somewhere, a singer recites an old tale, and children listen with their knees drawn close. They are not hearing a lecture. They are hearing the world made strange. That is where giants live, not only in height, in memory. Ancient Mesopotamian literature includes heroic figures of immense strength, semi-divine descent, and extraordinary status. The most famous is Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, remembered in later epic tradition as partly divine and deeply human. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and other major institutions have studied the Gilgamesh traditions as a mixture of historical memory, royal ideology, myth, and philosophical reflection. The figure may rest on memories of an early ruler, but the literature makes him far larger than any ordinary king. He is not simply tall, he is excessive. He builds walls, oppresses his people, wrestles a wild companion, seeks fame, loses what he loves, and searches for escape from death. The story is not about a giant in the childish sense. It is about a human being enlarged until every desire becomes dangerous. His body becomes a question. What happens when a king has too much strength, too much hunger, too much divine inheritance, and still cannot defeat mortality? That question touches the Anunnaki bloodline mystery with a cold finger. If rulers claim closeness to the divine, then some stories test what that closeness means. Is divine ancestry a blessing? Is it a burden? Does it make someone wiser? Or only harder to control? The heroic figure stands near the royal bloodline, but he also exposes its fear. A body touched by gods may become magnificent, but magnificence can become trouble very quickly. Your feet pass over packed earth, where spilled water has dried into pale stains. A man nearby sharpens a blade. A woman carries bread covered with cloth. Normal life continues around impossible stories. That is important. Myths of great beings do not float above society like decorations. They enter houses, schools, temples, and political imagination. They teach listeners how to feel about power. The fringe tidbit here is especially persistent. Some modern writers connect Mesopotamian heroes, long-lived kings, and divine beings to literal hybrid giants, claiming that ancient bloodlines produced rulers of unusual size or ability. Mainstream scholarship does not support these claims as historical evidence. Still, the idea survives because ancient texts often blur human and divine categories, and because exaggerated bodies are an old way of describing exaggerated authority. A giant can be a memory of power. A giant can be a warning about kings. You pause near a wall where brickwork rises above the street. The wall is practical, defensive, and political. It says the city can protect itself. It also says someone had the authority to command thousands of hands. To later imagination, the builder of such walls becomes almost superhuman. Not because he personally carried every brick, although kings would probably not object if you pictured it that way, but because his will moved many bodies at once. That is a kind of giant. A ruler's physical body may be ordinary, but his social body is enormous. His command reaches canals, fields, workshops, soldiers, scribes, prisoners, and distant villages. He eats through taxation. He speaks through heralds. He remembers through inscriptions. He punishes through officials. When ancient stories enlarge kings, they may be expressing this social reality through flesh and muscle. The open scholarly debate concerns how semi-divine heroes should be read in relation to actual kingship. Some researchers emphasize literary symbolism, seeing figures like Gilgamesh as meditations on mortality and civilization. Others stress royal ideology, Arguing that heroic tradition helped shape the public image of rulers, some focus on older mythic material woven into later compositions. The answer may not be one path, but a braided rope. You hear the singer's voice carry through the dim street. The words are not precise to your ears, but the mood is clear. A powerful man is being made larger by rhythm. His actions are arranged into meaning. His failures are turned into wisdom, or at least into something that sounds wise when sung beautifully beside a fire. The listeners know kings can be cruel. They know strong men can take what they want. They know temples and palaces stand because ordinary backs bend beneath them. But a myth allows these tensions to be explored without naming the current ruler too directly, which is generally wise if the current ruler has soldiers. The hero can be praised, questioned, mocked, feared, and mourned at a safe distance. This is where giants in the margins become necessary. They allow a culture to speak about dangerous greatness. A king too close to the gods is not merely legitimate. He may also be unstable. He may forget human limits. He may believe the divine part of his story and neglect the mortal part, which usually ends badly and creates extra work for everyone. The Anunnaki, as divine powers associated with high authority and fate, deepen this atmosphere. If gods decide human destinies, then a hero of divine descent becomes a living crossroads. His blood suggests access to the sacred order, yet his grief proves that access is incomplete. He may carry a divine mark, but he still lives under death. That is the uncomfortable balance at the heart of ancient kingship. Royal blood promises nearness, death corrects the promise. Your mind drifts toward the margins of tablets, where damage can turn certainty into smoke. A broken line may remove a name. A missing sign may hide a relationship. A damaged passage may leave modern readers leaning too close, hoping the clay will surrender one more secret. This is the perfect place for giant theories to grow. Where evidence breaks, imagination steps in, wearing very confident shoes, yet the fragments themselves deserve a gentler reading. They show a world fascinated by beings between categories, human and divine, mortal and famous, builder and destroyer, shepherd and predator, king and monster. These blurred figures may not prove hidden genetics, but they reveal how ancient people understood power as something both sacred and dangerous. That is a truth worth keeping. In the cooling evening, the singer's tale reaches a softer moment. The great hero is no longer only triumphant, he is afraid. He has seen death too closely. He has discovered that no wall, no title, no divine parentage, and no roaring strength can save him from the final narrowing of breath. The children listen more quietly now. Even the adults stop pretending not to listen. The giant becomes small, and somehow larger. This reversal is central to the hidden bloodline theme. A ruler may claim divine descent, but the story asks what that descent is worth. If the bloodline cannot protect against loss, then its power lies elsewhere. It does not grant immortality, it grants authority, memory, and a burden of expectation. The king must act as if heaven touches him. While knowing his body remains clay, a faint wind moves through the street. It carries the smell of cooling brick and cooked grain. Lamps begin to glow in doorways. Someone laughs softly, perhaps at the singer's dramatic face, because even ancient audiences enjoyed a performer who leaned into the moment. The city settles into night, but the enlarged figures remain in the mind. Giants in Mesopotamian tradition are not simply monsters stomping across the plain. They are exaggerations of longing, fear, royal ambition, and divine proximity. They stand where human society tries to describe those who seem too powerful to be merely human, yet too flawed to be truly divine. They occupy the margin because the centre cannot hold them comfortably. Perhaps that is why modern imagination keeps returning to them. It wants bones, measurements, secret lineages, and proof. The tablets offer something less solid and more unsettling. They offer stories in which power grows beyond human size, then discovers that size is not salvation. In the last light, the wall of Uruk, real or remembered, stretches across the mind like a dark line against the sky. It is built by labour, claimed by kingship, guarded by gods, and haunted by a hero who cannot escape death. There. The bloodline is neither confirmed nor erased. It becomes a question pressed into the shape of a body too large for peace. Perhaps the giants were never hidden in the earth. Perhaps they were hidden in the way people imagine power. Women of the sacred house carry the hidden line in ways that are quieter than conquest, yet no less powerful. You enter a courtyard where the morning light lies pale on brick, and the air carries the scent of wool, crushed herbs, warm bread, and lamp smoke. A doorway stands half open. Beyond it, a woman of high rank moves through ritual space, not as an ornament, but as a living bond between palace and temple. Her footsteps are measured. Her silence has authority. In many modern retellings, ancient bloodlines become a parade of kings, fathers, sons, and noisy men with excellent hats. Yet Mesopotamian history does not allow the line to remain so simple. Women appear as queens, priestesses, property holders, dedicators of offerings, transmitters of status, and political anchors inside sacred institutions. Their presence is sometimes indirect, sometimes hidden by damaged records, but it is real. A mainstream historical fact rests in the career of Enheduanna, daughter of Sargon of Akkad, and High Priestess of the Moon God at Ea. Scholars from Yale, Oxford, and major museum collections have studied inscriptions and later literary traditions associated with her name. She is often described as one of the earliest named authors in world history, though researchers continue to discuss the exact relationship between her historical office and the hymns preserved under her name. That debate matters because it reveals the force of sacred female office. A royal daughter placed in a major temple did not merely retire into holiness. She embodied alliance. She connected dynasty to deity, palace to city, family to cult. Her body became a diplomatic bridge, and her title became a seal placed upon the political landscape. You stand near the edge of her world, where attendants carry textiles and vessels through narrow rooms. The walls are cool in shadow. A bronze fitting catches the light. Somewhere nearby, a woman speaks in a low voice, giving instructions that others obey without hurry. The sacred house is not a passive space. It hums with storage, ritual, song, administration, and memory. The hidden line passes through such rooms, not always through battle, not always through crowns. In ancient Mesopotamia, elite women could hold roles that shaped dynastic legitimacy. A queen might sponsor temple works. A princess might be dedicated to a deity. A priestess might preserve the connection between a ruling house and a powerful city god. Marriage could bind rival powers, strengthen claims, or place one family's blood within another household. Inheritance was not only land, it was recognition. The Anunnaki bloodline, viewed through these women, becomes less like a single masculine chain and more like a woven cloth. Some threads are public and bright, others run underneath, holding the pattern together where the eye barely notices them. The kings may shout from inscriptions, but the sacred house often works in a lower register. It shapes belonging. It protects continuity. It makes divine favour appear domestic, intimate, and carefully tended. There is a fringe tidbit, of course, because there is always one waiting near the lamp. Some modern writers imagine that priestesses preserved secret Anunnaki descent through controlled marriages, sacred rites, or hidden matrilineal lines. Mainstream scholars do not treat this as demonstrated history. Yet the fascination grows from something genuine. Ancient societies did use women's marriages, offices, and ritual status to secure power across generations. That is not a small thing. It is the architecture of continuity. You move into a chamber where woven cloth hangs from a peg, dyed in muted colours now faded by dust and time. A low table holds bowls, oil, and small containers of scent. The air is soft with wax smoke. This is not the battlefield, but power is present here too. It is present in who may enter. It is present in who may touch the offerings. It is present in whose name is spoken in prayer. A queen or priestess can transform a royal claim because she makes it appear rooted in sacred care. The king may be the public face of heaven's approval, but women of the sacred house often help carry that approval into daily ritual. They sponsor, mourn, dedicate, intercede, and embody. They stand at thresholds where family ambition becomes divine service. The open scholarly debate concerns the degree of agency held by elite women in these roles. Some historians emphasize how royal daughters and wives were instruments of dynastic strategy. Others point to evidence of real authority, property control, religious influence, and literary prestige. Both readings may hold truth. A woman can be used by a system and still act powerfully within it. Human history is annoying like that, always refusing clean categories. Your mind drifts toward an Heduana again, not as a statue, but as a person beneath titles. She may have known the weight of being placed inside a sacred office for political reasons. She may also have found voice, authority, and identity there. The later hymns associated with her name speak with intensity, devotion, and personal struggle. Whether every line comes from her own hand remains debated, but the tradition itself remembers a woman whose sacred speech mattered. Speech is inheritance too. A hymn can carry a line, not a bloodline in the narrow sense, but a line of memory, authority, and presence. When a woman's name is copied by scribes, her voice survives in a world that often prefers to remember men as builders and conquerors. The clay keeps her, even if history tries to make her a footnote. Clay can be surprisingly rude to forgetting. The sacred house also makes the body political. A princess dedicated to a god may not marry in the ordinary way, depending on period and role. Another royal woman may marry to secure alliance. A queen may produce heirs whose legitimacy depends not only on their father, but on her rank, her family, her ritual standing, and the stories told around her. Blood moves through mothers whether inscriptions celebrate it or not. This should make the hidden bloodline feel less like a secret tunnel, and more like a living network. Fathers transmit names, mothers transmit bodies, priests transmit approval, scribes transmit memory, temples transmit legitimacy. The divine world hovers above all of it, giving human arrangements an aura of inevitability. The Anunnaki, as figures of high order and fate, belong to the distant ceiling under which these human designs unfold. You hear a soft scrape of sandals. An attendant enters carrying a vessel of oil. The woman of the house lifts her hand, and the movement is small but final. No soldier stands nearby. No weapon glitters. Yet the room rearranges itself around her gesture. This is another form of rule, one that rarely gets carved into heroic scenes, because apparently history has always had a weakness for men hitting things. But quiet authority lasts. It enters archives. It shapes succession. In royal households, the question of whose child could inherit was never simple biology. It involved rank, recognition, ritual, alliance, and timing. A son born of one woman might stand above another because his mother carried higher status. A daughter might become the key to holding a city through religious office. A marriage might turn an outsider into kin. The bloodline, therefore, is never only blood. It is blood interpreted by power. This is the unsettling truth hidden beneath the elegance of sacred women. They help reveal that ancestry is not a natural fact left alone by society. It is arranged, witnessed, named, and defended. The same child can be nobody or heir, depending on what the system says he or she is. The sacred house helps the system speak. The day grows warmer. Light spreads across the courtyard. A servant shakes dust from a textile. Somewhere, a singer practices a line of praise. The woman of the sacred house disappears behind an inner doorway, and for a moment the place seems emptier. Yet her authority remains in the objects, records, offerings, and expectations she has touched. Perhaps the hidden Anunnaki line is not found by chasing only kings through lists of fathers. Perhaps it must also be followed through daughters placed in temples, queens whose names appear beside dedications, priestesses whose prayers hold cities together, and mothers whose rank shapes the future before a child can speak. The sacred house does not shout its truth. It keeps it folded. It keeps it in oil, wool, clay, song, and controlled access to the divine. It keeps it in the body of a woman standing between a god and a dynasty, where human blood becomes sacred not because it is visibly different, but because the world has been trained to treat it as necessary. And in that quiet chamber, with incense thinning near the roof beams. The line continues without needing to announce itself. A system beneath the myths begins to appear when the separate pieces stop behaving like separate pieces. You stand above the city in imagination, high enough to see the temple platform, the palace rooms, the fields, the canals, the market lanes, and the river shining beyond them like a restless blade. Nothing here is truly isolated. Every wall belongs to a pattern. Every title points somewhere else. The city is a machine of meaning. It breathes through ritual. The gods stand at the top of the arrangement, not merely as distant personalities, but as owners of order. Each major city has its divine patron, its sacred house, its festivals, its storehouses, and its careful obligations. Below the gods, kings claim service and favour. Below kings, priests and officials translate invisible will into schedules, rations, taxes, offerings, and commands. Below them, workers, farmers, herders, brewers, potters, scribes, singers, soldiers, and children keep the whole structure moving. No one escapes the pattern entirely. Even rebellion must speak its language. Your eyes drift across the fields, where irrigation channels divide the land into narrow lines of labour. Water is not simply water here. It is controlled fertility, measured survival, and political power made liquid. Whoever controls canals controls food. Whoever controls food controls offerings, wages, armies, and obedience. A canal can look humble under the sun, but it may carry more authority than a spear. Records from ancient Mesopotamia confirm that cities depended on complex systems of irrigation, temple administration, labour organisation, and long-distance exchange. Scholars at Stanford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have studied how these overlapping structures helped produce some of the earliest large urban societies. The evidence is practical and dusty, full of account tablets, seals, tools, storage rooms, and building remains. Yet beneath that practical world, the myths give everything a sacred frame. That is the strange beauty of it. The mundane becomes cosmic. A ration list is not only a ration list when the temple stands at the centre of the economy. A field is not only a field when it belongs to a divine household. A king is not only a strong man when his office is said to descend from heaven. A worker is not only tired when creation myths say human labour began as part of a divine decision. The Anunnaki fit into this system as figures of high rank and remote authority. They belong to the background architecture of fate, judgment, and cosmic order. They do not need to appear in every document to shape the atmosphere of belief. Their power lies partly in distance. They make the upper levels of the universe feel populated, organised, and capable of decision. Your mind moves through the city like a slow bird. In one courtyard, a woman grinds grain. In another, a scribe seals a tablet with damp clay. Near the temple, workers deliver baskets. Near the palace, guards wait in heat that makes their helmets unpleasantly ambitious. A priest studies a calendar. A merchant weighs silver. A farmer curses a clogged canal with theological sincerity. The system holds all of them. It also uses all of them. This is where the bloodline question becomes broader than ancestry. A ruler's blood matters because the system makes it matter. A priestly office matters because the system makes it sacred. A temple archive matters because the system trusts written memory. A myth matters because the system uses it to explain why the world is arranged as it is. Nothing depends on one secret alone. Everything reinforces everything else. The quirky fringe tidbit here is the idea that the Anunnaki left behind a complete hidden blueprint for civilization, including kingship, agriculture, astronomy, and human hierarchy. Mainstream historians do not accept this as literal evidence of outside design. Still, the fascination grows from a real observation. Mesopotamian civilization did create impressively integrated systems, and ancient myths often imagined order as something handed down from a realm beyond ordinary humanity. The scholarly debate remains lively around how much early Mesopotamian order was driven by temples, palaces, households, ecological pressures, warfare, trade, or competition among cities. Some researchers emphasize centralized institutions. Others see a more mixed economy. where private families and local networks mattered greatly. The old idea of a single temple-controlled society has been refined again and again, because new evidence keeps making the picture less tidy. History enjoys ruining tidy pictures. It is one of its hobbies. You descend now into the market, where the system becomes noisy. There is the smell of onions, fish, wool, beer, and hot dust. A seller argues over weights. A buyer squints at a jar. Children run where they should not. Someone's sandal breaks at the least dignified moment. Sacred order may rule the universe, but daily life remains full of small disasters. That contrast is important. Ancient people did not live inside myth every second like actors reciting solemn lines. They bargained, joked, worried, cheated, loved, mourned, and complained. Yet the sacred structure waited behind ordinary actions, ready to explain them when needed. If the harvest failed, the gods mattered. If a king won battle, the gods mattered. If a child was born into a royal house, the gods mattered very much indeed. The hidden line, then, is not a straight cord, it is a web. One strand connects divine assembly to kingship. Another connects kingship to temples. Another connects temples to labour. Another connects labour to creation myths. Another connects royal women to sacred offices. Another connects scribes to memory. Another connects floods, heroic bodies, and impossible reigns to the feeling that human history rests on something older. When all strands are seen together, the Anunnaki become less like isolated beings and more like symbols of the upper chamber of the system. They represent the powers who decide, rank, measure, and judge, whether approached as gods, theological concepts, or ancient memory forms. They occupy the position from which order descends. You feel that descent in small things. The seal pressed into clay, the king's name on a brick, the offering placed before a statue, a farmer's grain measured for a household greater than himself. Each gesture tells the same quiet story. Power comes from above, enters institutions, and settles into human hands. Those hands then build walls, dig canals, write laws, assign work, and name heirs. The myth is not separate from politics. It is politics wearing the oldest clothing it owns. In the palace, officials may speak of borders, labour quotas, and rival cities. In the temple, priests may speak of offerings, purity, and divine favour. In the schoolroom, scribes may copy ancient lists. In the fields, workers may speak mostly of the heat, because the heat is very persuasive. Yet all these voices belong to the same world. The system does not require everyone to understand it fully. It only requires participation. Most people do not need to explain the theology of kingship to obey a tax collector. They need to know the collector has a seal. The seal has authority, and authority is backed by palace, temple, and fear. The sacred story adds height to that chain. It makes the commands seem rooted not in one man's appetite, but in the arrangement of the world. This is the unsettling part. The myth may comfort, but it also disciplines. It tells the tired worker that labour has cosmic meaning. It tells the ruler that his command is sacred. It tells the priest that ritual maintenance protects existence. It tells the scribe that signs preserve order against oblivion. Each role receives dignity, but each role also receives limits. A system that explains everything can become difficult to escape. The evening falls over the city. Lamps appear one by one. From above, the settlement looks almost peaceful, a cluster of warm points beside dark water. You know better now. Beneath the lamps lies a structure of obligations, symbols, offices, and stories. The visible city rests upon invisible claims. Perhaps this is the hidden truth beneath the Anunnaki bloodline. Not a single family moving secretly through time, but an ancient method by which divine order entered human society. Bloodlines mattered because they gave the method bodies. Temples mattered because they gave it rooms. Tablets mattered because they gave it memory. Myths mattered because they made it feel eternal. The night grows still. The river moves without caring who rules. The stars appear above the temple roof, patient and cold. The system beneath the myths remains half seen, like foundations under sand. It was built by humans, yet imagined as older than humanity. It served the gods, yet fed the palace. It explained suffering, yet demanded more work. And perhaps that is why it endured. It made civilization feel inevitable. The bloodline becomes an empire when old local stories are lifted from city walls and carried across wider lands. You stand now where a road leaves the river plain, stretching toward distant territories that do not share the same patron god, the same dialect, or the same memory of kingship. Dust rises behind soldiers, traders, messengers, and animals loaded with goods. Power is no longer only a city's secret. It is learning how to travel. Empire changes the scale of belief. It stretches every claim. A king ruling one city may say his god favours him. A king ruling many cities must say something larger. He must explain why different temples, different peoples, and different old loyalties now belong beneath one throne. The ancient language of divine favour does not disappear. It expands. It becomes more flexible, more ambitious, and more dangerous. In Mesopotamian history, later rulers inherited older Sumerian ideas while reshaping them for broader political worlds. Akkadian, Babylonian, and Assyrian kings drew from earlier traditions of divine election, sacred kingship, temple building, and cosmic order. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown how these rulers used inscriptions, rituals, and mythic language to claim legitimacy over lands far beyond one city-state. The old patterns survived by changing shape. You walk beside a caravan at dawn. The air smells of leather, wool, sweat, and cold ashes from last night's fire. A bronze fitting knocks gently against a wooden frame. A messenger carries a sealed tablet wrapped with care, because clay can command men who never saw the king's face. That is empire in miniature. Authority travels as writing, seal, threat, and story. The Anunnaki remain part of the deep background of that story. They belong to the older divine architecture that makes rulership seem anchored above ordinary politics. As empires grow, kings do not always need to name every ancient power. They need the atmosphere those powers helped create. The world has ranks. Heaven authorizes rule. The king stands between gods and people. Obedience protects order. Rebellion invites chaos. That script is wonderfully portable. Unfortunately for rebels, it is also useful. A ruler who conquers a city can present himself not merely as a destroyer, but as restorer of proper order. He may rebuild a temple, return a statue, sponsor offerings, or claim that the local god has accepted him. This is not gentle behaviour wearing perfume. It is conquest translated into sacred grammar. The sword opens the gate, but ritual tries to make the gate remember it was supposed to open. Records confirm that Mesopotamian kings often commemorated temple construction, military victories, and divine support in royal inscriptions. These texts were not neutral reports. They were carefully shaped declarations meant for gods, elites, future rulers, and sometimes for the king's own anxious heart. A ruler repeats that the gods chose him because repetition hardens into public truth. You pause near a boundary stone, its carved signs worn by weather, land, law, and divine warning meet on its surface. A curse may threaten anyone who moves it. Gods become guardians of property. Heaven protects lines scratched into earth. It is almost impressive how quickly sacred order learns real estate. Here, the bloodline becomes less intimate and more imperial. The king's ancestry still matters, but his claim must reach people who are not kin. He becomes father of lands, shepherd of peoples, favourite of great gods, chosen agent of cosmic stability. His bloodline is no longer only a family chain. It becomes a political symbol stretched across languages, fields, temples, and conquered memory. The quirky fringe tidbit takes this imperial expansion and turns it into a hidden world dynasty. Some modern writers claim that Anunnaki blood moved from Sumerian kings into later empires, secretly guiding Babylon, Assyria, and beyond. Mainstream scholarship does not support such a biological continuity as evidence. Yet the older religious language truly did move forward, and that movement can feel like a hidden inheritance if read too literally. The real inheritance is textual, it is ritual, it is ideological. One empire receives old titles and makes them grander, another receives old myths and rewrites them around a new god. A later king borrows ancient prestige by presenting himself as restorer of traditions older than his own rule. The bloodline becomes empire because memory itself becomes imperial property. Whoever controls the past can make the present appear inevitable. An open scholarly debate continues over how much later Mesopotamian empires consciously preserved Sumerian traditions as sacred antiquity, and how much they reshaped them for immediate political needs. Some researchers emphasize scribal conservatism, where ancient compositions were copied for prestige and learning. Others highlight creative adaptation, where old materials were actively reworked to serve new powers. The clay tablets show both memory and invention walking together. You enter a palace courtyard at evening. Torches smoke near carved walls. Officials stand in ordered groups. Foreign envoys wait with gifts, nervous dignity, and probably uncomfortable shoes. The king appears beneath symbols of divine favour, not as a man having an ordinary day, but as the centre of a carefully staged universe. His body carries the empire's claim that many lands can become one order. A single human body is too small for empire, so ritual enlarges it. Titles stretch him, inscriptions multiply him, statues place him in distant temples, seals repeat his authority in towns he will never visit. His blood may be mortal, but his image travels with a stubbornness that feels almost supernatural. This is how kings outgrow flesh without defeating death. Yet empire also exposes the fragility of the sacred line. The more lands a ruler claims, the more gods he must respect, absorb, or subordinate. The more people he commands, the more stories he must manage. Every conquered city remembers its own old greatness. Every temple has its own dignity. Every local elite knows how to smile while waiting for weakness. Empire is never as solid as its inscriptions pretended. That is the quiet irony. The grander the claim, the louder the fear behind it. When a king calls himself chosen by the highest powers, he is also admitting that ordinary force is not enough. He needs the weight of heaven because earth is restless. He needs inherited myths because conquest alone leaves bruises. He needs sacred ancestry because empire without meaning becomes only extraction. And even ancient people noticed when someone was merely taking their grain. The Anunnaki bloodline, by this final widening, dissolves into something more enduring than secret descent. It becomes the ancient habit of making power sacred. It becomes the claim that some rulers carry a right older than consent. It becomes the transformation of family, office, temple, and myth into a structure large enough to govern millions of fears. You look out from the palace roof. The night covers fields, canals, roads, and distant towns. Somewhere, a scribe copies an old Sumerian line into a newer language. Somewhere, a priest tends a god whose city has changed masters. Somewhere, a soldier sleeps beneath a wall built by people he never knew. Somewhere, a mother tells a child that kings rule because the gods allow it. The empire rests upon that sentence. It is simple enough for a child. It is heavy enough to hold a world. Perhaps the bloodline was never hidden because it was invisible. Perhaps it was hidden because it stood in plain sight, dressed as kingship, carried by ritual, repeated by scribes, and accepted as the natural shape of civilization. The Anunnaki remain in the deep chamber of the story, distant and unresolved, like judges whose faces cannot quite be seen, and perhaps the story is not yet complete. Now the lamps lower in the mind, and the river becomes only a dark ribbon under the stars. You do not need to solve the tablets tonight. You do not need to decide whether every ancient claim was symbol, memory, politics, or dream. Let the clay keep some of its silence. Let the broken signs remain broken. Across the old plain, the temples soften into shadow. The palace gates close. The scribal rooms are empty. The last read stylus lies beside a drying tablet, and no hand reaches for it now. Somewhere beyond the city, water moves quietly through a canal, carrying moonlight in small trembling pieces. You breathe slowly. The ancient world does not demand your answer. It only offers its fragments, one by one, like stones placed in your palm. A god's name, a king's title, a woman's office, a flood survivor, a long reign that cannot fit inside ordinary time, a council of power seated beyond the visible sky. Perhaps these were memories of fear. Perhaps they were tools of rule. Perhaps they were sacred poems built around questions that still trouble human beings. Who made us? Who commands us? Why do we work? Why do some bloodlines rise above others? Why does every empire claim heaven, then vanish into dust? The night does not reply. It only widens. So let the old stories drift away from certainty. Let Sumer become a far line of warm brick and fading smoke. Let the Anunnaki return to the hidden chamber of myth, neither proven nor dismissed too easily. Let the kings sleep beneath their broken names, and let the clay tablets rest under the patient care of darkness. And perhaps, somewhere in that darkness, the first mark is still being pressed into wet clay,